Great. Thanks, James. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's session. So we know that running an advice firm is incredibly complex and challenging, and we know that those complexities aren't going away anytime soon. In today's session, we're hoping to provide you with some insight on how you can get more time out of your day and spend more time focusing on those things that are really important to you and your clients. So today I'd like to welcome our panelists. So we have Rajat Pekar from Investment Trends, Grant Chapman from FinTech Financial Solutions, and Phil Anderson from the Association of Financial Advisors. Now I'll ask if we can see the results of that poll, which will determine what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so it looks like based on a majority, making advice affordable, is there a role for scaled advice, has won. For those that are interested in learning about the value of the technology stack, we will absolutely cover that off in future sessions throughout 2021. So don't fret, we look forward to sharing those insights with you as well. So when we think about the advice process, stakeholder alignment and best practice, I guess it's good to understand what advisors are doing from a best practice perspective to make advice more affordable within their firms. I'll start with Rajat in relation to this. Rajat, what insights can you share in relation to what clients are willing to pay for advice?
Well, Deborah, it's a pleasure to be here, firstly. Thank you for having us on. For those of you who don't know the Investment Trends research, we do large-scale surveys of consumers, and in these studies look at people's appetite for advice and how much they're willing to pay and so on. And I think one of the things that our research confirms is that the perceptions of how much advice should cost is much lower than the reality of how much it costs people or advisors to provide the advice. When we surveyed people in July, we asked them, how much are you prepared to pay for financial advice? And this is among people who are actually looking for an advisor. And the average they're willing to pay is only $360. Which is peanuts, right? Like you can't even provide scaled advice at that price. And this is a bit of an issue created by the industry as a whole. Like we haven't been working together to educate the Australian population about the value of advice and essentially setting expectations around what the costs of advice is and so on. When you talk to the planning market and you ask financial planners, how much does it cost you to break even on providing advice? So once you account for your rent, your overheads like your receptionist and the actual time you spend and so on, the average advisor says that it cost me about $3,000 or just under $3,000 to provide financial advice to a new client. So there's a huge disconnect between that 3,000 and the 360 people are willing to pay. Now, that said, at the end of the day, like we all know that we're getting clients, right? There's lots of people who do end up getting financial advice. What generally tends to happen is that people actually don't know what is it that an advisor is going to help them with. But once they sit down with you and you tell them, these are all the different services I have and these are all the different ways I'm going to help you, we find that people become much more willing to pay for financial advice. In fact, someone who has used a financial planner in the past, when you ask them how much they're willing to pay, the amount they cite is much closer to the actual cost of advice. I think as part of this topic, though, the question is how do we make advice affordable, right? Like what is it what is it that we can do as financial advisors? When we survey end consumers, we like to do this thing called choice modeling. So we give them a series of scenarios where we say you can get face-to-face comprehensive advice, but it's going to cost you like $5,000 or somewhere between $2,000 and $5,000, or you can get like scaled advice at a lower cost. Like when you put in those more realistic prices in, you generally find that the main way we provide financial advice right now appeals to only a very small subset of the population. Just 9% of Australians say that they're willing to get that traditional way of getting advice, which is the face-to-face comprehensive advice that costs between $2,000 and $5,000. Where actually the big opportunity is in the market is scaled advice, because intuitively people want to start with one-off or topical advice. You get help around particular aspects of their finances, and from there build on to have a more holistic advice relationship. You can almost think about a relationship with a financial advisor as a marriage, right? You kind of divulge all your personal information and your finances and things that you wouldn't talk to your best friends about to this person who's essentially a stranger. So the way to think about it is if you go and get comprehensive advice, it's like jumping into marriage straight away. Whereas scaled advice, people see it more as dating. Like they see it as something where I can go to a financial planner, they can help me with one little topic, and then I build some trust. I'll come and get them to help with another bit of topic. And then I'm happy to get comprehensive advice later on. There's 3 times as many people who want to start with scaled advice than there are who want to start with comprehensive advice. But 93% of these people who want to start with scaled advice, they're happy to get comprehensive advice down the track. Okay, so essentially scaled advice can serve as a strong hook when it comes to addressing the affordability of advice.
Fantastic. Some very interesting stats there in relation to, I guess, what unadvised clients would be willing to pay versus those that actually understand the value of advice. In relation to that scaled advice, I might jump to you, Phil. I'd be keen to understand from your perspective what role that scaled advice plays in keeping advice affordable, and then where you see the footing of advisors to be able to provide that scaled advice.
Well, I think there's no doubt going forward that scaled advice is going to be critical to keeping advice affordable for everyday Australians. And I love listening to the research about what clients actually want and are prepared to pay for, because we very well know that the research says the unadvised aren't prepared to pay, whereas existing clients are paying substantial amounts of money for the advice that they get, and they're getting great value out of that. The unadvised don't understand the value of financial advice. They don't understand the process. So when you talk about getting into it through scaled advice, they don't know what scaled advice is. Often when they turn up for the first meeting, they've got a vague idea of what they need, but it's the process that they go through with the advisor that builds that rapport and creates the sense of what the future will be. And the value is articulated through that process. So it's not just the financial plan. It's about how an advisor makes a client feel emotionally, and about the confidence it gives them and the security, about how they change their behaviours, and how all of that together contributes value to the client to lock them in to want to continue to be part of this relationship. Where we are now is at the moment with scaled advice, or ASIC's now using the term limited advice as part of their recently announced Unmet Advice Needs project, is there's so many obstacles about whether it is compliant and how you do it. It's not just the best interest duty, it's also about the FASEA Code of Ethics. So ASIC's put out guidance through Regulatory Guide 244 about scaled advice, and made it clear that it is permissible, but nonetheless doing it, you're not getting out of any of your obligations. All of the other obligations still apply. It's just the fact that you can do this through a more streamlined process and less understanding of the client's personal circumstances, as long as that meets the needs of the advice that you deliver. So that's the starting point. The complication has been all the discussion around the FASEA Code of Ethics that I guess delivered a message that it wasn't that simple to provide scaled advice, because you really did need to understand the client's broader circumstances and their likely future circumstances and broader need. So we're in a very difficult situation at the moment. We see a lot of opportunity with scaled advice, but we need more regulatory certainty, and then we need to have the opportunity for advisors to work through their processes, to improve those processes, to remove non-value adding activity, and then being able to push forward and really rationalise the process so that it does add value at every stage for the client and they want to come back. So yes, we will have a future for scaled advice, and it will be really important. and obviously it's the way that a lot of clients will get into advice before they move on to a more holistic advice proposition.
That's great. Thanks, Phil. And it's nice to kind of hear, I guess, that united view from yourself and Rajep there in relation to the place that Scaled Advice has for advisors. Now, just before I jump on, I might just mention that we do have the Q&A question box during this session. So if you did want to ask any questions of our panelists, please feel free to jump in as we're having this discussion. On that, Grant, so I guess as a financial advisor, what are you doing in your practice to make advice affordable, and is it affordable for your clients?
Thank you, Deb. Well, I think as Rajep and Phil have alluded to, there's quite a few challenges for advisors at the moment, and one of those is really working out what the value is that we deliver to clients. And I think that's come through in both the previous comments. And I think a big challenge for us is understanding what is your target client segment, firstly. And we all do things in slightly different ways. I think fundamentally advisors do very similar things, but it's the type of client that you might be wanting to work with that might lead to how you can make it affordable or how affordable. So what I mean by that is if you're dealing with a Generation X or a younger cohort, and they might be used to getting things online and doing things quite cost effectively, then you'd need an offer that's going to be attractive to them and appeal to them. And I think, Phil, you mentioned that, providing a scaled advice solution and particularly using technology. I can't emphasize enough how much technology needs to be integrated into this for the efficiencies and delivery of that. But you may use a scaled advice way to appeal to and get the initial business with a younger group. And then that can lead to, as their life evolves, because this is a journey across their life. It's, right through the stages they go through, from coming out of uni, buying their first house, getting a car, all the things that we know people do. And then as they move into the stage of having families and getting debt, working through business issues if they start their own business, and then moving into accumulating some significant assets in some cases, and then how we help them plan and deliver for their security and certainty in retirement. So I guess it's really important in terms of affordability that we work out who are we targeting in that range of life cycles, and then what is it that we're going to be able to do with how we demonstrate our value to make that advice really good, appealing to them. And when I say that, I mean, people think advice costs $360, as Rajep said, when really we know it's $3,500 to $4,000, and we've done a quite in-depth analysis on that. So really, for a client that has more strategy need and more sophisticated situation, the cost of advice for them may actually be significantly higher. And in terms of us delivering and meeting all of the compliance and regulatory obligations, and Phil mentioned Regulatory Guide 244 into Scaled Advice, and then FASEA's Code of Ethics and Standard 3, and there's a real conundrum there that needs to be clarified. So we're almost in a position where we have to deliver a comprehensive advice piece to meet all of these rules across the board, and that's our challenge at the moment. And I think to make another point is, for scaled advice to work, it may be in a particular segment of our market, and at the moment there's a big discussion around industry funds and whether they can deliver scaled advice. So, I hope I've answered the question in some way that's meaningful, but I think it's the type of client and how you're going to be able to add value to them and how much it actually costs, and knowing what that value is that you're adding, and that actually becomes value. And, the affordability piece becomes less important when you've demonstrated that.
Fantastic. Thanks for that insight, Phil. I might get us to pop up a poll. I'd be interested just to understand with our attendees online, I guess, how confident you are when it comes to positioning the cost of advice to your client. Is this something that is, really easy to do, or if your clients start objecting, how challenging do you find that to overcome those objections from the client? And I think, in relation to Grant there just talking about, I think I just called you Phil, Grant there talking about the value and the cost essentially not mattering so much when your clients can see the value there. So keeping on the subject of that cost of advice, Rajab, it'd be good to understand what research you have in relation to, I guess, the margin around advice fees and what the current margins are looking like for advice fees.
Sure, yeah. I suppose at the end of the day, we all want to make money, right? It's about having a sustainable and profitable business. And the big issue right now is because of the level of compliance in advisors businesses, because of their fear that they're not going to appropriately demonstrate that they've met their best interest duty to clients, there's a very elevated cost of advice. Just to maybe give an example of one of the things Grant was talking about, when you look at how much it costs to provide scaled advice, earlier I said advice overall, comprehensive advice costs $3,000 to provide. Scaled advice for a financial planner costs $1,500 to provide, because advisors are really worried. If I don't consider everything, or at least a bit more than the scope of the advice that people are asking from me, I'm going to get burnt. However, because at the end of the day, it's about supply and demand, right? We find that financial planners, they have to price their services in such a way that it's also appealing to their clients. And generally speaking, if you look at the average financial planner out there, they only break even on the upfront advice they provide. There's literally zero margin at the industry level when you win a new client. So that's kind of a very challenging business model. Like you're adding, last year was actually worse. 2019 was a fairly challenging year for advisors, where the average client they added, they were losing $500. Now it's back to the long-term average of just breaking even. So that the upfront burden is a big issue from a profitability sense, but advisors do make fairly decent returns or margin from the ongoing relationship. For the average advisor, each client you keep provides a margin of $2,500, because the cost of maintaining a client on file and just doing ROAs and things like that, the ongoing servicing, it's lower than what you can charge and earn through things like the commissions on insurance and what have you. So whenever like the regulator plays with like commission structures, etc., it can hit people's bottom lines as well. But just from a fee for service perspective, the average advisor is making about $2,000 per client per year in margin. And that's been trending down in the longer term. If you go back to, for example, 2013, 2014, the average margin per client was $2,600. So $2,100 is quite a bit lower than that. But it just shows that right now, for financial planners, the true opportunity, like where you're going to make money, is from your ability to retain a larger client book. So anything that makes you more efficient so that you can maintain a bigger client book is really powerful. If you're sitting behind your computer and picking stocks every day, that's time you didn't invest in, doing the client opt-in and showing them value and encouraging them to stay on for another year. For the business owners on the call, we also ask financial planners what their profit margin is, or their practice profit margin. So I'm sure you'll be quite interested to know how you compare to your peers. The average financial planning practice profit margin is 24% in 2020, and that's down from 25% in the previous year. There's only about 12% of planning practices where the profit margin is greater than 40%. Most financial planners, like the bulk of it, is concentrated in the 20 to 29% mark. So profitability as a whole is hard, because advisors must first get efficient in how they can easily retain their clients, encourage them to stay on, opt in for ongoing advice so that they can make that money from the ongoing relationship. And if you look at the average financial planner, they have 112 active client relationships, those who are opting in on an ongoing basis. Whereas if you go back 10 years, to 2009 or 2010, like right after the GFC, the average planner had 170 active relationships. So we're quite a large way down, and that's really hit the bottom lines of many advice businesses.
Thanks for that, Rajat. We've actually got a question coming through from one of our attendees, and I'll put it out to the group, and you can work out who might be best placed to respond. So the question here is, do you think there's a place for an ongoing relationship with relation to scaled advice? And in your mind, what would that look like?
Well, I'm happy to kick off.
I actually have it. Sure. Go, Phil, go. I already spoke.
So I'm happy to kick off and say that absolutely there's no reason why there shouldn't be an ongoing relationship with someone who gets scaled advice, because as time evolves, they might certainly look for different forms of advice. But even in the initial scope of the advice, whether that's life insurance advice or it's superannuation or it's an investment type or it's strategy-based advice, there's still longevity in that strategy or that product, and they need to continue to maintain the relationship to get the other benefits out of advice. Now, those emotional benefits and those behavioural benefits that were part of the initial advice process, they want to hold on to them. They want to continue to leverage that. So yes, an ongoing relationship is equally relevant to scaled advice as it is to a more holistic form of advice.
Thanks, Phil.
A good example. Yeah, so a good example is when you look at, for example, industry super funds that just do intra-fund advice, right? People who get advice first, say, on super contribution, later on they come and they get advice around insurance and what have you, and they establish this trust, like they see it as an ongoing relationship, partly because it's their super fund after all, but that drives them to then turn to a super fund and say, hey, I want comprehensive advice. Like I want to get bigger. So in a sense, like there is value if you can work out in how to structure with your clients the limited advice as part of a bigger ongoing piece. But I don't know how to do that. And maybe Grant, you know, being the advisor in the room, you have some ideas around how you can position that.
Thanks, Rajat. Look, I think it's a real tension for advisors, and I'll speak openly that we've got a real challenge on our hands to overcome this conundrum between how do we actually deliver what the client needs, whether it be scaled advice or any other, or in between to a full advice need where every area of advice comprehensively is addressed and with a lot of cost and time involved that the client has to pay for. Until the regulators give us clarity, I mean crystal clear clarity about that, in some ways we have to sit a little bit trying to scramble to get technology and our processes to work in line with what we think the regulatory obligations are. Obviously, as whether you run your own AFSL or just as an authorised representative or whatever structure you're in, we are obligated to do the best thing for clients, and we have a fiduciary obligation. So I think that's a real issue for advisors at the moment, and we're all trying to figure out how we can deliver what's needed to meet the regulatory requirements, and of course technology and efficiency and processes come into play, and still be meeting the regulatory rules but also making profit. And I think that goes to the point that Rajat was talking about earlier, in that advisors are less profitable at the moment, albeit in a small way. And here we are with this idea that we're supposed to be looking at clients' entire picture in terms of their financial needs and delivering advice across all those areas, even if they just ask for one thing like an insurance policy. And how do we actually do that and make money is a real conundrum. But I think we just have to move forward the best way we can and use technology, integrate with the best providers and make that efficient, and at the same time be re-educating our clients and delivering the information to them in a way that they understand the value that's being provided to them. And I think when clients actually do see that and do go through the process of understanding it, they're more willing to pay for that advice as well. So having said that, that's a different proposition to the intra-fund advice piece. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Grant. I guess with us knowing, the importance of the value advice and keeping clients engaged, Grant, I'll flick to you again. It'd be good to understand how you're leveraging, technology in your business, or if you are leveraging technology to have that client engagement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the heart of it, one of the key things is client engagement. And to history, going back of all of the legacy things that advisors have worked through, technology really hasn't helped us deliver that client engagement piece particularly well. And when I say that, there are different pieces of software out there that are very good, but they're not all integrated. And, a lot of the industry uses one or two pieces of software, and we're fundamentally challenged about how we can get the client engagement process to work and make it efficient. So I think that is a really important part. And clients don't really care about all the noise that goes around what our jargon and what's going on from a regulatory point of view. And as much as I think lawyers are an essential service for our community, and they do a lot of good, we've got to be careful that we don't start talking all of the regulatory jargon and legal jargon that we're all having to do and learn from the FASEA point of view, when really clients just want to know, do we understand them, and that we've got what they want to do documented and planned out with the steps that they can go through to achieve them, and show them and give them confidence and trust and certainty about their future. So I think that's one of the biggest pieces, is client engagement.
Fantastic. In addition to that, Rajep, what can you share in relation to what the clients are telling us through your research on how they want to be engaged by their advisors?
Yeah. So we actually track the consequence of not doing what Grant was saying, which is like keeping your clients engaged. And one of the big things in our research this year is that satisfaction with financial planners is at the lowest level we've observed in 10 years. And this isn't because financial planners aren't managing their clients' investments well. If you ask clients to rate your financial planner on their investment expertise and investment selection, that's actually at a near time high, because for a lot of people, the advisor convinced them to stay invest in the market or even invest some of their cash back in March and April and May. So everyone's like really happy with the investment performance of their clients. However, what you're finding is dragging the satisfaction score down is the piece around how frequently I get contacted, things like ability to explain investment concepts and keeping me well informed. And this is, when I say satisfaction with planners at the lowest level observed, this is a generalization. We can actually split people into three groups and find a very strong correlation that relates directly to the market crash following the lockdowns. Some people say, if you ask them, did your financial planner contact you as a result of COVID-19? Those who say, yes, my planner proactively contacted me are really happy. Their satisfaction levels are really, really high. If you look at those who say, my planner didn't contact me, the satisfaction levels are okay. But about a quarter of people say that I had to reach out first. And these are the people who are unhappy. Now, each of your clients have different levels of expectations of how often you engage them. And you need to clearly communicate upfront what is it the service they're going to get, because we find that dissatisfaction doesn't happen when you don't communicate or you do communicate. It happens when you don't meet their expectations. Like, some people want to hear all the time, but if you're someone who uses an advisor and you only want to hear once a year, but you're getting emails every month, like, you're going to be upset as well, right? So one of the key things here, I mean, it's so simple, but it's know your client, try to customize or tailor for each individual's communication preferences. After that, like, our research shows that there's a lot of comms needs that they generally tend to have. People want to hear about things like updates to rules and regulations, tips to better manage their savings and spending, some stuff around investment strategies. We have a generation of consumers coming through now, clients who want to be educated by their financial planner. Back when I was in financial planning in the 2000s, the mentality was, I don't want to educate my client too much because they'll leave and they'll go do things on their own, like they'll fire me, right? But nowadays, people want an educator. They want a coach. And as a result, they want to get contact and content that will help them feel more informed, and they're more likely to stay in an advice relationship for the long term if the advisor is educating them, is mentoring them. So the days of my clients will leave if I educate them too much, they're gone. Okay, it's almost like a hygiene factor now that you will educate them, and most of them are happy to receive emails to get this. More and more, especially if your clients are younger, they want to hear it in the form of video. If you think about it, like how do you consume content nowadays? More and more on YouTube, more and more in different types of video. Short, snappy videos like 5 minutes or less. This is kind of ideal for many people. And once the lockdowns end, like if clients say we want group client seminars where I can meet the other clients that you have, etc., they're kind of happy to be part of the family. We see planners, of course, like adapting to this need, and certain groups of financial planners are ahead of the curve. If you look at planners as a whole, half of them use social media now to engage their clients. And this is more about sharing content or news that's aligned with your values or aligned with what you want your clients to know. If you look at planners as a whole, like LinkedIn is the most used form of client engagement. But when you look at planners aged under 35, Facebook is actually used much more than LinkedIn to engage clients. And in fact, a quarter of under 35s use Instagram to engage with their clients. Like, how on earth do you use Instagram to engage your clients? Maybe Grant, because he's under 35, can talk about that later. But the other thing to add is there's one really big missing piece of the puzzle for client engagement in Australia, and that's online access. Like, clients want a decent portal where they can hop online. And when I say clients, I'm talking about more than 90% of your clients, and more than 90% of potential planner clients say that they want or they expect some form of online access, and they want to track how they're progressing towards their financial goals. They want to be able to access their documents. They want to view what are the investments you hold. They want to book appointments with you. They want to message and chat with you through that portal. They don't want to transact. Like, that's not what they're after. There's this view that online access means clients want to transact, but the reality is they just want to stay connected. And in a sense, it saves you time, because clients are self-servicing, right? If they're self-servicing, that means they're calling you less often. You have more time to have a bigger client book. Also, when they get into the habit of going onto an online portal, they feel they're getting more value out of the relationship, and they're ascribing that value to you, so they become more likely to opt in. So I don't know, like, Grant, if you have any disagreements with what I just said here, but it's quite clear in our research this is what clients are after.
Yeah, absolutely. No, don't disagree at all. And, this is part of what we're all working towards. And from my perspective in our business, we're using things like video. And whilst we don't use social media as much as we could, and thank you for the compliment, I'm certainly not under 35. And however, I think that's one of the things that you've got to work out in your business, how you can do this efficiently and actually get the right message to the clients that you actually want to attract. So that's not an easy thing to do, and it really becomes a fairly important part of your business, but it's a marketing strategy, really. So how you do your videos, what words you use, how you communicate effectively to not only appeal to the segment of the market that you want to attract, but also to keep your current clients happy and feeling like you actually understand what's important to them. And so I think video is a critical one, and it means that advisors, this technology that's evolved certainly since COVID as well. We're all using the Teams and Zoom and this online types of technology, but to be getting online and doing a video and preparing that in a way that's professional and delivers something that might be relevant to a client, where you're doing it as a broadcast email, there's a lot to consider. So what we do is we always do an email to our clients, for example, for a big event that happens, a big market event, something like the Biden and Trump scenario at the moment. We did a video to our clients with some communication wrapped in that. And I think that really helps. But then there's also the other tools that you can use where you can do one-on-one videos for your clients. And there's a lot of little apps out there that enable you to, after a meeting, to just articulate the key points of the meeting to the client and say to them, it was really great to meet with you today, and we really understand those important things about your family and your work, and what you're trying to achieve in terms of upgrading your home. You're looking for that home on the Sunshine Coast, for example, and talk to them about that we've got the strategies there that we know we're working through with you, and give them that message. I think that's really highly valuable. And Rejep, to your point, then it makes sense that the research is driving and supporting that. How we do that as advisors is still to be unfolded. And if I could just add another point, that a lot of this stems from whatever the software advisors and advice businesses and dealer groups are using. It's also, though, the platforms that they're on. So sometimes the access to log on for a client to see how they're progressing and tracking is actually directly, it is directly linked to the platform that their investments are on. And so how you can deliver that consistent and well thought out messaging has to be integrated with the platform, as well as linked back to how you might want to do it, whether it's video, social media, as well as your one-on-one meetings, etc. So if that makes sense, I think that's really going to be and is a very important part of what we do.
That's a great point. Thanks there, Grant. And absolutely making sure that those portals and tools that you're using are linking to the appropriate information for your clients when they log in. Phil, it'd be great if you could share what your take is on, client portals and tools being implemented by advice firms.
Well, I think on technology more broadly, we've obviously gone a long way in 10 years from what was a world where it was largely paper-based files to the incorporation of all the client file being on the financial planning system at the core of the business, which is also the CRM. And the future is positive in terms of portals for clients at their end. But in terms of the efficiency of the advice process, technology plays a role along the way. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, to streamline the data gathering on clients. We're already at this situation where the information exists out there. So we've got the ATO portal that has information on the client's salary and their super contributions for the last 12 months, their total superannuation balance and their transfer balance cap, and all of that stored there. Advisors at the moment, unless they're tax agents, don't have access to it. We've got all these other services that are becoming available that consolidate client information. We've got the government moving ahead with the open banking reforms. So there's a lot of prospect in the future for streamlined gathering of client information, which will take a significant chunk out of the advice process. But it's got to be end to end. So we've got to make sure that the technology is contributing to the advice construction process. And at the moment, one of the big obstacles when you're doing product switching is how do you get information on the current product? What are the fees? If it's a legacy product, how do you get that? If it's an industry fund, how do you actually get access to the information on the client's current holding that you can incorporate into your advice? There's a lot of opportunity for advice the whole way through the value chain, but importantly, I think Rejep talked about how at the portal end, you can really personalize the experience and make the client feel in control of the process, yet at the same time, deliver that more efficiently. So I think we're at this point where we recognize all this technology that's been built and that's available in the fintech space, but we need, regulatory certainty as far as how advice needs to be provided so that we can incorporate that into processes. And advisors need the time to focus on technology. They've been so focused on dealing with regulatory change, whether it's passing the FASEA exam, doing their FASEA study, transitioning their grandfathered commission clients, dealing with the LIF reforms, dealing with client demands as a result of everything that's been going on, including the reforms and of course, importantly, the consequences of COVID-19 and economic factors. So they need the time to get back and focus on their own businesses to improve processes and better leverage technology.
Thanks, Phil. I'm sure that's a sentiment that's shared by a lot of people on the line today. We've just had a question come through on the chat, and it's just asking if we think that there's a place for digital advice in the future.
So I can take this one. The short answer is yes. However, the way it comes into play might not be exactly how you expect it. When you talk to financial advisors about using, say, robo-advice or automated investment selection tools for their clients, there's actually quite a bit of appetite for it. However, when you talk to them about what sort of clients they'll use it for, it's primarily for their lower balance clients. Financial planners say, look, I have higher value clients or people with complex situation. I need to serve them with quite a high degree of paraplanning and impersonal touch. But for lower balance clients, I want to be able to serve them with little or no paraplanning. So the role of digital advice tools would be to replace the paraplanner or free up the paraplanner for a particular segment of clients. So it's not about serving your whole client base. Very few financial planners think that they could achieve that. But for most, it's about the lower end of your client base, your C's or D's, if you go that low, whereas the A's and B's are more about the personal human touch.
And what I would add, sorry, Grant, what I'd add to that is that most clients get value out of their relationship. They get value out of how their advisor makes them feel and the way they change their behaviours and the way they hold them accountable. A piece of technology is not going to make you feel anything or change your behaviours or give you confidence about the future in the same way that a person can. So I agree with Rajat. There's a role for it, but it's not quite the way it might have been envisaged to replace advisors. It's to supplement them and to be a vehicle to support those lower fee paying clients.
Yes, agree very much, Phil and Rajat. And I think that also goes to the heart of where the technology development is happening at the moment. And, I have this dream that we can see a client and engage them. They've had input into the initial engagement to the extent where they've entered in all their key information and told us their thoughts and how they're feeling. We've had discussions around what's really important to them. And then when we're going through the advice piece and we're getting into more detail and how we cover off our regulatory and compliance obligations is more efficient and done through the technology where it pulls all the data we need efficiently. As you mentioned earlier, Phil, wouldn't it be great if we could get every piece of data we needed immediately? But it's also that where a client can actually come in onto your portal or what they perceive as your portal, and they actually log into their advice document live, and it's a living document. And that's the piece that I know technology is moving towards. I think there needs to be more focus in that space, as you mentioned also earlier, Phil, about not focusing as much on the regulatory and compliance now that we've been through what we've been. But I think the future is really bright for us as advisors, that we can really deliver with efficiency at a much higher level with high quality, where the clients feel like it's about them and they have a live technology interface that they can work with. So that's a dream I've had for a while, and I'm still keen to get there. I think we will over the next few years. And those advisors that can get through this next couple of years with all the things that are happening, which we don't need to repeat, but the study and FASEA and changing their business processes and how they charge and how they can make a profitable future. Once the advisors that get through this are in a really good place, because we have now less advisors, and I think that will become really critical that the good advisors who are here stay and deliver great advice to more people. So, I think that's a great point.
Thanks for that, Grant. I'm very mindful of time here, and we appreciate everyone for staying on for a couple more minutes. It's been quite a fascinating discussion today. We started with the cost of advice and scaling advice, and we've kind of then moved into how do we be more efficient, perhaps leveraging technology to talk to our clients, and then through to how can technology help us be more efficient. I might just ask that we pop up the poll results just to see how everyone's feeling about when it comes to justifying or being able to position that cost of advice to their client. So it looks like we have, quite a few people that are very confident, and then, perhaps an opportunity there to work with some of our clients to help you understand your value better, so that when you are getting those objections from your clients, you're in a much better position to resolve that. So with that, we will finish there. I'd like to thank Rajep, Grant and Phil for joining us today. It's been really, really beneficial to listen to you all and get your take on the land of advice as it stands. And I look forward to running some more sessions in 2021 to cover off more of this information. Over to you, James.